Well, let's go forward and ask the same set of questions about John Pilger, who's going to be the focus of our attention for the next 2 weeks. What about Pilger? Is Pilger neutral? For those of you who've been reading the book, you're going to find out very quickly, no, he doesn't make that claim of neutrality as well. Much like Synoth, Pilger does not say, I am reporting from a position of neutrality, I'm outside of ideology, I'm objective. He will critique those and suggest an alternative way to approach journalism, just like Synoth does. And you could ask the same set of questions about Pilger. Pilger was born in Australia. He's lived in the United Kingdom for a long time, so he's really a Brit. So if you look at the British political system, you could ask the same question. Is Pilger an advocate for, a partisan on behalf of any of the major British political parties? Well, in Britain right now there are 3 major political parties. What are they? The 3 major political parties in Britain right now. The Labour Party. The Tories or the Conservatives. What else? There's one other one that's emerged recently. The Liberal Democrats. Okay, so England for a long time was really, there were multi-parties, so it was effectively a 2-party system. Labour, kind of the equivalent of the Democratic Party in the United States, and the Conservatives or the Tories, kind of the equivalent of the Republican Party. Now there's emerged a 3rd party called the Liberal Democrats, which actually captured a significant share of the vote in the last election, national election, and is in a partnership with the Conservatives now. So British politics a little more complex, but is John Pilger an advocate for the Labour Party? You'll find out the answer is no. He's been a harsh critic of Labour politics, especially the politics of former Prime Minister Tony Blair, who was a Labour Party Prime Minister. Is he a supporter of the Conservative Party, the Tories? No way. Not going to go there. He's not a supporter of the Liberal Democrats either. And in other words, John Pilger, much like you couldn't peg Synoth in a conventional political schema, it's going to be hard to peg Pilger as well. When he's reporting on the United States, which he does often, is he a Republican or a Democrat? Same thing. He's a critic of all of these institutions, all of these political positions, all of these parties. When I say a critic, it doesn't mean that he is critical of every single thing that every government or government official does. It's that he approaches it as a critic, approaches it from a position that says basically, here's power, power operates in certain ways, power is prone to abuse, let's look at how it's working out. Okay. And I would say about Pilger much the same that I just said about Synoth, that Pilger is a working reporter. Again, Pilger's at a point in his career. He's in his 60s. He's renowned around the world. He's well regarded as a journalist. He could sit back in London and pontificate and just go on the talk shows and sort of be the expert. But he chooses not to do that. He continues to travel the world and report from the field. The book you're reading has reports from all around the world based on his first-hand reporting. At the same time, Pilger is not afraid to draw on that experience of now 4 decades of reporting and offer a framework, offer an analysis, put the reporting from the ground into that greater context. Okay? So what I'm suggesting is that although if you ask John Pilger or Synoth, are you intellectuals, they might be a little hesitant to claim the mantle because of the way the term is used, the elitist way in which it is so often used. But I'm suggesting that Synoth and Pilger are examples of critical intellectuals. They do intellectual work. Right? They observe, they interview, they collect data in scientific terms. They're out there in the world trying to understand by observation and interviewing, and the review of records, the 3 main ways that journalists work. They observe events, they interview people involved in those events, and they review documents that are valuable in trying to bring information to bear on those events. So journalists are out there observing, interviewing, and reviewing documents, and Synoth and Pilger do all of that. They're also doing that not just to pretend that they're going to give you just the facts, but to use that reporting to try and understand how the world works. You see in Synoth and Pilger's work an attempt to understand how power operates. And the goal of that is not simply to know for the sake of knowing, but to give people the information necessary to make social change possible. So I'm suggesting that Synoth and Pilger are good examples of critical intellectuals, of the journalists fulfilling that role as a critical intellectual. Now, you don't have to agree with the conclusions either of these fellows reach. You might read Synoth's work or read Pilger's work and come to different conclusions yourself. That's fine. As I say over and over again and want to emphasize, there's 242 students in this class. And I do not expect, nor would it be reasonable to expect, that everyone is going to look at the world the same way. We all come from different places with different backgrounds and different fundamental assumptions about the world. In reading Synoth or reading Pilger, the goal is not to suggest your ideas should conform to theirs, but to evaluate the work that they do as journalists. And I'm suggesting they're good role models as journalists, not because of the specific conclusions they reach, although obviously I tend to agree with the conclusions they reach, but because of the way they approach their work. And what I want to do for the remainder of the time is show you some clips of Pilger talking about his work. All right. Now, first of all, when you hear Pilger talking about his work, let me warn you, he's not particularly eloquent. You'll see in these clips that, like many journalists, Pilger is a better writer than he is a speaker. This happens all the time. People who are brilliant writers are often not so quick on their feet. Right? So you'll see Pilger kind of halting and stumbling. But try and pay attention to the points he's trying to make about the nature of his work. So the first of these is going to be some excerpts from a clip that he gave when he was in the United States a couple of years ago. He spoke in Texas in several places, including UT. This is, however, a video of a Q&A session he did at Houston Community College, where I think he gave some provocative answers. So we're going to watch a few of these, then we'll come back and talk about it. Any questions or comments before I go forward, though, about this way of thinking about the work of people like Synoth and Pilger? Okay. The first of these clips from the Houston event, he's going to be talking about how he sees the work of journalism. The first question was, just talk a bit about your career. And I think there's some interesting parts of this that...
Parliament has an extremely privileged occupation.
First of all, he begins by talking about journalism as a privilege. He's spent his whole life, he's made a living traveling the world and understanding the world, talking to people, both the powerful and ordinary people. And he sees it as a privilege, and I think that's the way I would think about it as well. A lot of people spend their whole lives doing work that they hate. You may know some of them, yes? There's nothing quite as painful as listening to people who hate their jobs talk about their jobs. And Pilger sees it as a privilege to be able to spend his entire life simply engaging with people to understand the world better. That's an important thing to think about when pondering journalism, what a privilege in some sense it is. Okay. He talks about the importance of journalists as being independent. Journalism is nothing, he says, if it's not independent. Otherwise, he says, you're just the spokespeople for the spokespeople. So we're going to come back and talk more about this later, but thinking about what it truly means to be independent as a journalist or any other type of critical intellectual. He talks about truth-telling. Difficult because in a complex world, claiming to know the truth sounds haughty, sounds arrogant, but he says we're striving to tell the truth the best that we can. He suggests that people in power have the hardest time telling the truth. Not specific people that he doesn't like, but the powerful in general. And you'll see in Sinot's work, or in Pilger's work, both of their work, a kind of relentless critique of people in power. Is that because people in power are evil? No, not necessarily. Is that because people in power never tell the truth, never engage in any activity for the benefit of others? No. He's talking about the tendency of people in these positions of power to have their sort of moral compass obscured by that power. And then he talks about the centrality of ordinary people in his journalism. That even when he's covering the affairs of the powerful, the policies of the powerful, the decisions that they make, at the core of his work is always a concern with people. So he says that he always tries to return and describe the lives of ordinary people. So in a very short period there, Pilger talks a lot about what are some, I think, core questions in journalism. So bear with me while I advance this a bit. If you've started reading Pilger's book, you realize that someone who takes this approach to journalism is going to therefore bump up against a lot of pain in the world, yes? If you're going to take this mission seriously, it means you're going to engage with people who are suffering. You're going to cover people who are in very desperate circumstances. And one of the students here asks him a question about, essentially, how do you stay sane? How do you do that? How do you go through the world constantly covering that kind of reality and not go crazy? And notice he talked about the privilege of being a journalist. Not just a job, it's actually a privilege in the world. And part of that is that in addition to seeing all of the horror and all of the death and all of the destruction that comes in this world, he retains a sense of optimism, maybe naive, he says, but he retains that optimism because in his reporting he's also engaging with ordinary people and seeing that even if their struggles don't change the nature of power, he's not naive about the difficulty of changing the systems in which we live. But he says when people struggle, they sometimes create a better life. They give meaning to their lives in that struggle. And that's part of where his hope, his optimism comes from. Notice he talks about how important information is in contemporary societies. Without information, no change is possible. And note that he's not suggesting that his reporting provides people with the answers. His suggestion is that his reporting can help people understand, provide information. That information he provides comes with a point of view. Pilger, again, is not claiming that he's neutral in these great struggles, but he's not trying to prescribe the change. He's trying to provide the information, the critical information he thinks is necessary to make that change possible. And note that he suggests one bit of evidence for the importance of information is how much time, energy, and money people in power allocate to providing information, or in what he would call propaganda. That these systems, these powerful systems, the corporate system, the government, spends a whole lot of time, energy, and money giving you a picture of the world out of an awareness of how important that is. I want to go to one last segment of this in which he talks about how people in power react to him. Remember that people in power tend to have a very conventional view of the political arena, and we said that someone like Pilger doesn't really fit that conventional definition. So he's going to talk about how he sees these questions and talk briefly, he'll make a comment about one particular interaction